Kenya to Colombia, from Iraq to Korea, in slums, in schools, in prisons, and in theatres. Every day, people gather at TEDx events around the world to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. Today, you are part of a global conversation about our shared future. So what is this TEDx? TEDx is an initiative of the TED Conference, a non-profit devoted to ideas worth spreading. We grant free licenses to allow TED-like events to spread globally. This event today is based on the TED Conference format and ideals, but is independently organized by your local community. So please make sure to thank the team of volunteers who worked so hard on today's event. It's their ideas, dedication, and time that made it all possible. It's they who booked all the speakers, and the views you'll hear today are, of course, those of those speakers, not necessarily of TEDs. But we hope their talks spark an exciting conversation among you. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for openness and for critical thinking, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you'll take out. And now, on with the show.
Hello, and on behalf of all of us here at Queen's University Belfast, a very warm welcome to this exciting event. I'm Richard English, and I'm delighted to introduce our second digital TEDx event, brought together with support from our corporate partner, AFLAC Northern Ireland. TED is an organisation that brings together bright minds to give talks that are ideas focused and on a wide range of fascinating subjects, to foster and encourage learning, inspiration and wonder, and to provoke conversations that really matter. One of the main goals of TED is to provide a platform for thinkers and visionaries, so that society, here and around the world, can gain a better understanding of its biggest challenges, its major challenges, and to help to create a better future for us all. That TED goal links closely to Queen's University Belfast's social charter, a charter which underpins our commitment to translating ideas and teaching and research and professional expertise into life-changing action of many different kinds. At Queen's University Belfast, we want our work, in all of its aspects, to address global challenges, and we're committed to searching for solutions to key issues that have a great and positive impact on society. At Queen's, we want to encourage and share innovation. At Queen's, we want to exchange and share knowledge through collaborations and networks and connections across the world in order to develop and deliver benefits on local, national, and global levels. For those of you who may be joining us from across the world and are not familiar with Queen's University Belfast, perhaps I might just briefly introduce Queen's to you. Queen's University is ranked 21st in the world for International Outlook, drawn from the THE World University Rankings 2021. Queen's is a member of the UK's Russell Group, made up of the country's leading research-intensive universities. As one of the oldest and most beautiful universities in the UK, and I hope in time you'll all get to visit us here at Queen's, we're committed to the highest standards of academic excellence, committed to providing an exceptional student experience, committed on a daily basis to delivering world-changing research, coupled with an international outlook and very impressive record of graduate employability for those who have studied with us at Queen's. So that's the university. Now to this TEDx event. The title and theme for today's talks is Give Back, Move Forward. One of the exciting things about TED is that people with great ideas or a new way of doing something are given the microphone, are given the chance to share their ideas widely. And in the current situation that we all face, the situation of the global coronavirus pandemic, we've had to pre-record these talks in advance, as circumstances sadly still preclude our meeting in person at a conference venue where we're all in the same room. In curating the talks and the performances for today's event, we've highlighted just a small number of our outstanding staff, students and alumni at Queen's University Belfast. They will be able to showcase our community, offering a glimpse for you of the innovation, the discovery and the creativity that are taking place. I think today's programme illustrates very well the diverse ways in which our people are giving back and making a meaningful and positive contribution to society, while moving forward with their own work, with their own study, with their own research and with their own lives. As a university community, we are working to deliver positive impact locally, nationally and globally. I hope that each and every one of you will enjoy the depth and variety of these short talks and performances on today's TEDx programme. I'm now delighted to introduce and hand over to Dr. William Crawley, who will be our compere today. A Queen's alumnus and distinguished journalist, William is a BBC Northern Ireland broadcaster, and he will outline for you the format for the rest of the event and will introduce in turn each of our speakers. William.
Thanks, Richard, and welcome to TEDx at Queen's University in association with our corporate partners, Affleck and I. I'm William Crawley, a journalist with the BBC. I'm also a proud Queen's alumnus. Now, like everyone else, we have gone virtual this year, but luckily I never leave the house without my TEDx branding. Next year, we hope we'll be able to invite you in person to the university campus. Just imagine that, being in the same room again. Feels like science fiction now, doesn't it? Well, we all know that TED aims to bring together the world's leading thinkers and activists to provoke conversations that matter. And shaping conversations that matter is, of course, at the heart of Queen's University's central mission. Queen's is the UK's 9th oldest university. It's part of the Russell Group, and it's amongst the top 200 universities in the world. But its mission is also about making a real contribution to the life, health, and well-being of our society. That's captured in our theme today: give back, move forward. In 2017, Queen's launched its social charter, reaffirming the university's commitment to engaging with the communities around us. And the evidence is around us in the work, the study, the teaching and research, the volunteering undertaken by Queen's staff and students that's making a big difference to our society and our world. Have a look.
The world is changing at an unprecedented pace. Every industry is embracing change, drawing on a new wealth of insights and tools to advance in today's connected society. At Queen's University, we have a bold ambition to lead the way in the challenges we see ahead. Every day, we touch thousands of lives in our pursuit of excellence. Finding the solutions to real-world issues and inspiring research to have real-world impact. We are protecting the cybersecurity of billions of internet users. We are at the forefront of conflict resolution, making a difference to the lives of children, families, and communities across the world. We are working with industry to develop new technologies. We are creating access to safe, nutritious food for a growing population. And we're at the forefront of major medical breakthroughs, making a real impact on people's lives. We give amazing minds a place to do amazing things in a university fit for the 21st century. We are the heartbeat of one of Europe's fastest growing cities, in a country where the hospitality, welcome and warmth of our people is legendary. Together, we are meeting the challenges of our time head on, developing our students to be the leaders of tomorrow with the confidence and innovation to engage in an ever-evolving global culture. Together, we are shaping a better world.
Let's get going because we have a superb lineup of talent for you today. 12 brand new TED Talks and performances, as well as a sprinkling of some of the more memorable ones from previous events. And every speaker, every performer taking part today has a close personal connection with the university. We hope you get involved too. Our Twitter handle and hashtags are on the screen. Share the event with others. Let's get the conversation going. There's also an online program. You'll find the running order, speaker bios, Twitter handles for everyone taking part. Follow them. Share your thoughts. Feel free to fill our speakers' timelines with appreciation. And now to the first of our TEDx talks. Tina Yi is a first-generation Chinese-Canadian immigrant from Hangzhou in China. She took a Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Toronto and is completing her law degree at Queen's University. She's passionate about women's health, a passion born in a summer research project at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. That's where she also came face to face with the reality that medicine isn't just a strictly scientific discipline, it's also social and political. We welcome Tina Yi for her TEDx talk, Mind the Health Gap.
Let me start with this statement. Modern clinical medicine is systematically killing women. Now let that sink in for a second. It's a controversial take. How could medicine kill when it's the very instrument which ensures our survival? I'm going to begin with a scenario that I think a lot of women can relate to. It's that time of the month, your back, your neck, your arms, your legs, they all hurt for inexplicable reasons. You have a slight headache, you feel queasy, you feel nauseous. And then you feel the dull pain emanating from your abdomen. It's a pain that's very difficult to describe. It's not gnawing, it's not stabbing. So you're forced to lie down. You reach for the tea, you reach for the hot water bottle, and maybe that painkiller. This continues for 30 years. Girls, women, and anybody that menstruates will experience premenstrual syndrome. Yet, have you ever wondered why there's still no cure to treat for this pain? This is something which infuriates me, that when you do a search on WebMD, it suggests for the following treatments: a massage, taking a hot bath, avoiding alcohol and caffeine, and most appallingly, try to manage your stress, as if our pain is by our own faults. Sure, there's always painkillers, but have you ever wondered about the ramifications for taking painkillers every single month for 30 years? Liver cancer, hepatitis, liver failure. The demand on your body is huge. And when everything else fails, there's always hysterectomy, the surgical removal of the uterus. All of this just to alleviate pain. On the other hand, there are currently on the market 4 different types of medication to treat for erectile dysfunction, which is non-life-threatening, causes no further complications, and does not result in chronic pain. According to a research roundup, there are about 5 times as many studies being done on ED than there are on premenstrual syndrome. And the reason for this lack of funding? Well, PMS doesn't exist, the causes are too unclear, and it's just simply not a priority. So there's a gap in modern clinical medicine. And this health gap is hidden from the dominant social discourse when we talk about inequality. Science has this fabulous reputation of being unbiased, but have you ever thought about the systematic exclusion of women from clinical trials? And what about distinctive data separating male and female patients? Now, clinical trials to test for medications actually started in the 18th century, with scurvy and Dr. James Lind. And mass production of medication began in the 19th century. But it wasn't until 1990s, which was only 30 years ago, when women were actually included in these clinical studies. That's very scary, considering how the majority of the medications that we take today were studied and tested without women participation. So for things like toxicity, dosage, efficacy, we don't truly know their effect on women. And the reason why women were excluded from clinical trials? Well, female hormones were deemed harder to control for than male hormones. So in the interest of saving a few bucks, scientists have decided to just exclude women in general instead of jeopardizing their pristine male results. So is it apt for me to say that this is an act of negligence, that we're purposefully ignoring the well-being, the health, and the lives of half of the world's population? More insidiously, when women were actually included in studies, it was done during their early follicular phase when female hormone levels most resemble that of male hormone levels. So the next time when you take a pill, you ask yourself this question: does this pill really work for me? Or does it only work effectively during one specific window of my cycle? Aside from ineffective medication, we have the case of atypical symptoms. So when we say atypical, we usually think about the phrasing, these symptoms are not typical and thus we are not liable for any misdiagnoses. But what if these symptoms are actually typical? That they're only deemed atypical because they haven't yet been studied on demographic that is not male, middle-aged, and cisgendered. In women, especially young women, heart attack is such an example. It manifests in a highly different manner. A typical heart attack could be something like the numbing of the left side of your body, chest pains, maybe a slight headache. But in women, actually, what you get is extreme stomach pain, migraines, and nausea. And because these symptoms are deemed atypical, heart attacks actually go undiagnosed in a lot of women. When these heart attacks go undiagnosed, which can lead to cardiac complications and in some cases, death. So when I say that modern clinical medicine is systematically killing women, it's because clinical medicine has routinely sidelined and ignored women's health needs. The drugs don't work. The symptoms go undiagnosed. Women are told to deal with it. Women are socialized to ingrain this notion of suffering into our psyche. Modern clinical medicine may have helped us extend our lifetime, but modern clinical medicine also tells us that women's health is just not a priority. So unless we address this health gap, unless we acknowledge that more work needs to be done, women will continue to suffer. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina, for giving us such a great start to our TED Talks today. Our next speaker is someone I've introduced and interviewed so much in the past 12 months. As a research fellow and virologist at Queen's, she works on immune responses to respiratory viruses and their role in airway remodeling. With degrees in biomedical science, including her PhD, she's brought her experience to projects including asthma, influenza, and most recently SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, which is how I and the public first encountered her. Since the beginning of this pandemic, she has become one of the most recognizable voices in science communication here. And if she's been in great demand, that's because she has a rare gift of translating complex science into language that the rest of us can understand. Welcome, Dr. Lindsay Broadbent, with her TED Talk, Science Communication in a Pandemic.
It has never been more apparent just how important science communication is than during the COVID-19 pandemic, where experts in virology, public health and epidemiology have been providing regular commentary to the public. Today, I'd like to share with you some of what I have learned about communicating science during a pandemic. Not only for those that might want to get involved, but also for anyone that has seen a scientist on the news and wondered why we do it. I've attended a couple of communication courses over the years, and one thing that has always bothered me is that we're told to focus our talk to a specific audience. Am I talking to fellow scientists or to the general public? But why can't it be both? Science is universal, and everybody deserves to understand it. The whole world has been watching as the research around COVID-19 evolves. And I think we can all agree that there hasn't been such constant media coverage of a topic than there has about this pandemic. People are watching as science plays out in real time in a public forum, and while that presents opportunities to learn and to discuss and debate ideas, it has also contributed to the rise in science denialism and conspiracy theories. If we recognise science communication for the powerful tool it is, and encourage and train future scientists in how to discuss their work with their community, we could effect real change and see a return to the public's trust in science. Pandemics are nothing new. They have occurred throughout history, and with them, there have always been people that have sought to discredit scientists. But the pandemic we are currently living through is the first to occur in the age of TikTok. A quote from the Irish writer Jonathan Swift is, "Falsehood flies, and the truth comes limping after it." One look at a Facebook or Twitter timeline shows just how true this is. False information and fake news are more likely to go viral on social media. And once they do, it is almost impossible to undo all of that damage. Interestingly, TED actually have guidelines for what you can talk about on this famous red dot. I couldn't stand here and discuss unproven pseudoscience to whoever may be watching, but hugely influential people and even world leaders or ex-leaders can say whatever they like, knowing that their tweets will go viral and that a lot of people will listen. So how do we counter the misinformation that is out there? The answer is actually pretty simple. Scientists need to talk to people. We need to engage with the media, with the public, with policymakers and politicians, and with scientists that hold opposing views to our own. Before 2020, I was researching how respiratory viruses make us sick. I do a little bit of science outreach on the side, taking part in science festivals and going to schools, trying to convince kids that they should study viruses and that it might actually come in useful someday. Then, in February, I received my first media request. They asked me to comment on a new respiratory virus causing a few cases of pneumonia in China. I turned this down. I didn't think I was old enough or had enough experience, and I worried that people wouldn't take me seriously because I didn't have professor in front of my name. But after further consideration and some very insistent journalists, I realised that I shouldn't treat this any differently to the science outreach I was used to doing. Sure, the audience might be slightly older, but the goal is the same: to communicate science in a way that can be easily understood. Over the past year, I've taken part in hundreds of media appearances, and believe me, it can be tough. Sometimes I just want to go back to tweeting about the Great British Bake Off and what my current favourite song from the Hamilton soundtrack is. This time, we're talking about a pandemic, but next time, it might be an earthquake or a black hole or a return to discussing climate change. And we need people that can comment on any eventuality. And for those future experts, I'd like to share a few of the things that I've learned about communicating science that I wish I knew at the start of 2020. Number one, get involved. Take part in local initiatives like festivals and career days. Contact your institution or company press office or communications team and tell them you're willing to comment on certain topics. And be active on social media. Let people see what it is like to do your job. Number two, it always takes more time than you think. Do not underestimate the time commitment that public engagement takes. Not only to do the event or interview, but also to prepare for it. Which brings me to number three, always be prepared. Ask the producer or reporter or host or chair or whoever is running the event what the topic is and if they have a list of possible questions. Make sure you know your facts And find out if you'll be appearing alongside anyone else and Google them. Know their standpoint on an issue. Number 4, you can never be completely prepared, but that is okay. It is okay not to know something. In fact, it's a good thing when you're honest about it. And number 5, it is okay to say no. I find this one quite tough. I struggle to say no when someone asks me for a favour, but if it is something you do not feel confident doing, say no and maybe suggest a colleague. And remember, science outreach is a skill. It takes training and practice. Not only that, but it isn't really part of our job description. Very few scientific jobs have time set aside to allow for public engagement. This is something that we have to balance alongside our other work commitments, while still trying to maintain that mythical work-life balance. Thankfully, attitudes are starting to change. Research institutes and funding bodies are recognising the importance of the public trust in science. Because science alone cannot solve a public health crisis like COVID-19. For the public to trust in science again, we need experts that are able to translate science into language that is easier to understand. Science needs to move with the times. We need experts that are relatable and representative to act as translators for those who haven't learned to speak the language of science. The rest of that Jonathan Swift quote that I mentioned earlier is actually, "When men come to be undeceived, it is too late. Like a physician who has found an infallible medicine after the patient is dead." Let's not wait too long to realise that communication is one of the greatest tools we have to tackle this and any future pandemics.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. For our next talk, we're delighted to welcome the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for the Faculty of Engineering and Physical Sciences here at Queen's, Professor Chris Johnson. Alongside his faculty leadership role, Chris's own research examines the development of safety-critical systems where errors in software can lead to loss of life. His research helps to increase confidence in technical innovation. For example, allowing autonomous vehicles to operate alongside conventional road traffic and pedestrians without increasing the risk to the public. He's also worked with NASA, the US Air Force, and a range of European governments. Last year, he was appointed as an expert witness for the public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire. Incidentally, although Chris is a professor of computing at Queen's and has worked for almost 30 years in science and engineering, his first degree was in history. We welcome Professor Chris Johnson and his TED Talk, What Does Success Look Like?
This is a talk about hope, and I think hope is important, and in this talk I'm going to deal with it in two senses. In the first sense, hope is important for everyone in this period after COVID. And I always think in the morning, after, for many years after I heard a quote from Nelson Mandela, when I get up, I think, Mandela said, "It's not how many times that I get knocked down, it's how many times I get back up again that is what you should use to judge me." And that's not just important for everyday life, I think that's also important in engineering. And I'm Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Engineering and Physical Sciences here at Queen's. And that means as part of my job, I want to inspire the thousands of students that come here with both the resilience that Mandela's quote illustrates, but also something about creativity. And creativity is something that I don't think people meet very often in engineering. They're kind of familiar with people in white coats or whatever, people in looking at engines in cars during tests or services. But engineering is really about creativity. And there's a really good example of that. A lady called Lillian Bland, who conducted the first powered flight in Ireland. Back in 1903, the Wright brothers had successfully flown in North Carolina. And Lillian read about their exploits and began to build gliders and models over a period of time between 1908 and 1911. And she eventually reached the point where she'd made enough progress to put an engine into her airframe. And unfortunately, there was no manufacturer of aviation engines in Ireland, and so she ordered one from the mainland. And she went across to collect the engine after lots and lots of delays. And when she went to the factory, I think one thing you have to remember is that these engines were really experimental at the time. And to generate enough power to fly, the propeller was bigger than me. And the first time they demonstrated the engine to Lillian, the power created by it was so great that the propeller disintegrated and almost injured and killed all the people that were witness to it. But she didn't let that daunt her, and she took the engine back and fitted it to the aircraft. And even in tests, the first time that she tried the engine, it destroyed part of the airframe. And so she had to rebuild the aircraft twice before the aircraft itself was strong enough even to begin to think about a test flight. Another thing to remember is that Lillian was testing her ideas in Northern Ireland. She wasn't testing it on a beach in the United States. And it took her, it was 12 miles to cycle from her home to the field where she could begin to fly the aircraft. And it took her 5 weeks before the rain stopped enough for her to conduct the first test flights. That, again, illustrates something about perseverance in engineering. Anyway, when she got to the test field and she was about to fly the aircraft, she realized that she couldn't put enough fuel into the fuel tank because of the way the engine was fitting into the airframe. And so, showing true ingenuity of an engineer, she ended up fitting a whiskey bottle to the engine. But then she couldn't fill the whiskey bottle, and so in order to get the fuel into the whiskey bottle attached to the engine, she had to steal her aunt's hearing aid. And that's like a cone thing that they used in those days. And so you can imagine the tremendous amount of, courage, ingenuity, creativity, and just basic engineering knowledge to even get to that stage. Lillian's story is instructive because she realized that her tests, if you like, were not really going anywhere. Because the engine that she fitted wasn't really powerful enough to sustain the flight that she imagined. So she got several hundred meters, but no further. And to put a stronger or larger engine into the aircraft would have destroyed the airframe. And so her father, who was worried about her being an engineer, persuaded her to give up her test flights by effectively bribing her with a car, which at the time was the object that she wanted to pioneer with the most. Now, Lillian's story is interesting because she immigrated to Canada and died in the 1970s. And so our lives overlapped by a small amount of time. But I never had the fortune to meet her, but I remember her all the time. And if we look back about, say, 5 or 6 years ago, I was working as part of a team to plan for long-duration human space flight. So for those of you that might have seen the Hollywood film The Martian, it was that kind of scenario. How can we keep people alive long enough, for example, on the surface of Mars, to conduct scientific experiments and to bring them home safely? And one of the things I had to do in preparation for that was to look at the Apollo missions and see how they'd planned for those. And I can remember some of the kind of weird ingenuity that the early NASA astronauts and engineers resorted to in their planning. So, for example, the early plans for the Apollo missions considered sending 2 or 3 spacecraft to the moon at the same time, with the idea that if one got into trouble, they could transfer across the fleet, if you like. And that was borrowing ideas from the Mayflower and the early American explorers, or the explorers to the Americas. Another idea that they had was, if something happened to the crew on the surface of the moon, how would they stay alive long enough for a rescue mission, if anything like that could be planned? And so they experimented with edible spacecraft, so a material that was sufficient to keep them alive by eating small parts of the lander. Unfortunately, that's not a very good story, because at the end, the astronauts tasted the material and they said that they would rather die than have to live on this material that they were building the spacecraft of. If we come back to the Mars missions, what we were looking at was writing a computer program that would enable the astronauts to use the resources that they had on the spacecraft to keep them alive. So people may have seen the Apollo 13 film, for example, where people had to use the ground team's advice to reconfigure the spacecraft to get them back after an explosion and a problem on the spacecraft. Now, in the case of the Mars missions, we were trying to write computer programs to do that. And at the heart of it, I think, was fundamental problems in trying to instill creativity, instill ingenuity, instill courage, instill all of the things that Lillian Bland exhibited in a computer program. And there's kind of a twist at the end of this, which is that we made a certain amount of progress, but I never thought we ever got close to approximating what Lillian exhibited. But at the end of it, engineers started to ask, well, if we can do this for a spacecraft, in other words, write a program that helps us to detect problems and resolve problems in a spacecraft, maybe what we could do is write a computer program that looks for signs of mental illness or stress in the crew. And at that point, I felt that we'd come full circle and that we were back to, for those of you that may have seen the film 2001 by Stanley Kubrick, the computer HAL that takes control of the spacecraft. So I don't know what the barriers for human ingenuity and computer programming are into the future, but I do know that we need to be guided by the hope and optimism of Lillian Bland. I think she shows the correct use of technology to inspire us and to challenge us. And if we pay too much attention to the science fiction or the dark ideas of Hollywood, then I think that we won't progress in the same way that we would if we had the optimism of both Lillian and Mandela. Thank you.
And now to our next TEDx performance. Anna and Helen Monaghan are twin sisters. Anna is the oldest of the two by just 3 minutes. Currently, she's completing her PhD, investigating the role of iodine in pregnancy and child development, and she hopes to pursue a career in public health. Helen is a final year medical student, the culmination of 8 years at Queen's University. She's keeping an open mind career-wise, but at the moment she has a growing passion for psychiatry. Together, Anna and Helen make up the Monaghan sisters, twin sisters who perform as an a cappella duo. Their performance today is close to their hearts. Neither has had the smoothest journey to get where they are today, but what has helped them through, they say, is perseverance, hope, the ability to focus on the bigger picture. So please sit back and enjoy this with us. The Monaghan sisters with their TEDx performance, Trusting the Process.
Ooh, you build your barrier. The taller I become. The further you take my rights away. The faster I will run. You can deny me. You can decide to turn your face away. No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, but you're doing me wrong, so wrong. I thought that my pride was gone, oh no. Something inside so strong, oh, something inside so strong. The more you refuse to hear my voice, the louder I will sing. Hide behind walls of Jericho, the lies that come tumbling. Deny my place in time, you squander wealth that's mine. My light will shine so brightly it will blind you. No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, but you're doing me wrong, so wrong. I thought that my pride was gone, oh no. Something inside so strong, oh, something inside so strong. Brothers and sisters, when they insist we're just not good enough. Not good enough. Oh, when we know better, just look them in the eyes and say, we're gonna do it anyway. We're gonna do it anyway. We're gonna do it anyway. 'Cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, but you're doing me wrong, so wrong. I thought that my pride was gone, oh no. Something inside so strong, oh, something inside so strong, oh, something inside so strong.
Hi, my name's Anna. I hope today, through the pieces we've chosen, we're able to show you about giving back and moving forward.
And my name's Helen, and for our next piece we've decided to do a shortened arrangement of You Raise Me Up, because, you know, on reflection we were thinking this is something that we've had to do a lot over the past year for one another, and indeed going forward.
When I am down, and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come, and my heart burdened be, then I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up to more than I can be.
So for our last piece, we've decided to sing an original arrangement of Let It Be.
As we really feel that over the past year, there's something we've all had to adapt to doing and take each day as it comes.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be. And when all the broken-hearted people living in the world agree, there will be an answer, let it be. For though they may be parted, there is still a chance that they will see. There will be an answer, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow, let it be. I wake up to the sound of music. Mother Mary sings to me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be. 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 Whisper words of wisdom. Let it be. Whisper words of wisdom. Let it be.
Thank you so much, Helen and Anna. That was an amazing performance. Our next speaker is a distinguished transatlantic scholar, a professor of law both at Queen's and the University of Minnesota, a prolific author and the recipient of many national and international academic awards. Her expertise spans the fields of emergency powers, conflict law, transitional justice, human rights, and sex-based violence in times of war. Her scholarship is important and it's immersed in the real world and in some of the most traumatic episodes in the recent history of our world. Please welcome Professor Fionnuala Aoláin with her TEDx talk, Ending Counter-Terrorism as We Know It.
Hello, I'm Fionnuala Aoláin, Professor of Law at the Queen's University Belfast and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the protection and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. And today I'm going to talk about the end of counterterrorism as we know it. So counterterrorism is not new and neither is terrorism. States have long struggled to address the causes, consequences and harms that result from terrorism, not least because they have strained to find an agreed global definition of terrorism. But in the smouldering ashes of the Twin Towers and the ruins of the US Pentagon on 9/11, a new era of global counterterrorism was born. Some of that was immediately visible in the US invasion of Afghanistan and the clear articulation of a need for accountability and justice for the victims. Other pieces of it, including the now maligned, discredited war on terror, as well as the grim policies of rendition and torture, best captured by the images of orange jumpsuits and men in cages, illuminated the dark, dark side of counterterrorism. It's alongside these images that a more profound global shift was taking place. It was a deep and seismic shift as the United Nations, states and regional bodies embraced global counterterrorism. And the question is, what has that embrace delivered us? Well, it's brought us 20 years of enduring and unending violence. It has emboldened and enabled authoritarianism and undermined democracy from within. It has allowed states the liberty to define terrorism on their own terms without interference, thus making the humanitarian, the civil rights activist, the eco-warrior, the women's rights defender, a terrorist. Human rights protection is under severe and undulating strain, and counterterrorism has been an active and central participant in that outcome. Civicus, a leading human rights organization, estimates that civic space is restricted or impaired in 111 countries. In 2019, 300 human rights defenders were killed, including a rising number of women human rights defenders. These short snapshots are not generic. They're intimately connected with and sustained by national security practices and the use of counterterrorism measures as a normalized exception across the globe. They are exemplified in stories of women's human rights activist Loujain al-Hathloui, charged with terrorism because she claims Saudi Arabian women have universal human rights, including the right to drive. Seen in the arrest and detention of 3 human rights defenders in Egypt from a famous and old Egyptian human rights organization called the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights. Arrested for terrorism because they hosted foreign diplomats and briefed them on their human rights work in that country. It is evidenced in the abandonment of hundreds of children in camps in northeast Syria, branded as terrorist affiliates because their parents are believed to have been affiliated with ISIS. Counterterrorism is not making us more free and more secure, but operating as a convenient cover for the systematic violation of human rights across the globe. So, let's inspect this global counterterrorism architecture a little more closely to understand it a little better. After 9/11, the United Nations created a counterterrorism committee serviced by a special political mission, the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, to regulate global counterterrorism. These bodies are fueled by multiple Security Council resolutions that have built a global regulatory framework on terrorism that includes literally everything from financing to biometrics, borders to criminal prosecution, surveillance to airline passenger information. In addition, in 2017, the United Nations established an Office of Counterterrorism, an innocuously named coordination mechanism, yielding an exceptional budget and increased capacity and power to provide counterterrorism support and solutions to almost every problem, including those, in my view, that should in reality be left where they are, well outside counterterrorism, including education, health, children's rights, development, and women's rights. This growing, expanding, and powerful counterterrorism architecture within the UN is both a human rights light and a civil society free zone. Despite all of the evidence that tells us that human rights and the rule of law must be at the heart of security strategies in order to be successful in the long term and embedded in the long term. States and the United Nations have at best treated human rights as that unwelcome cousin at a wedding, or at worst, disinviting human rights actors from the counterterrorism party. So the question is, what do we do? Wishing goodwill on human rights will not make human rights magically appear in the global counterterrorism architecture, as well as in its day-to-day programming. And without a commitment to fundamentally undoing and revisioning the existing counterterrorism architecture and the strategy we have, we are all facing and watching Rome burn. What does this mean? In order to change it, it means reimagining security and counterterrorism for the 21st century. I think we need to do 4 things. The first is to rethink security fundamentally, understanding at a visceral level that 20 years of human rights-free counterterrorism has not worked and may have been extraordinarily counterproductive, and more of the same will not serve us well in the future. Second, we need a serious debate about the current size, effectiveness, and the added value of the counterterrorism architecture as it currently is constituted and paid for, and to assess whether it's necessary. In the short term, we need remedial action which is number 3, which would involve establishing a standalone and adequately funded human rights oversight entity within the global counterterrorism architecture and ensuring that it's adequately supported. Finally, and fourthly, counterterrorism without the involvement of civil society is a policy and a practice so devoid of meaningful substance with the implementation of human security on the ground that it is barely worth talking about. And why should we undo, after all of this argumentation, why should we undo the global counterterrorism architecture? Because first of all, it's not working. In fact, we don't really know much about what it does because we haven't paused in 20 years to evaluate it. Secondly, because as those of us who have lived and worked in Northern Ireland know, undoing violence and the underlying issues that propel it is deeply painful and complicated long-term work. And finally, we should undo it because we can do better. And doing better means integrating the rule of law and human rights at every step. This means, at a minimum, that we clearly say defending human rights is not terrorism. Defending women's rights is not terrorism. And abandoning children to life in subhuman conditions in the camps of the arid deserts of northeast Syria diminishes us all and makes us less safe. 20 years after 9/11, it's beyond time to end counterterrorism as we know it, to open up and refresh our toolkits, and to recognize that quick fix solutions to complex problems don't work, and that only when we place the dignity and value of the human person at the beating heart center of what we do will we be secure.
Thank you so much, Fionnuala. Our next speaker is listed as one of the UK's most influential women in tech and is an international multi-award winner for her services to diversity and inclusion in industry. A Queen's University alumna and a previous Queen's Student of the Year award recipient, Sheree Atcheson is the Global Director of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Peakon, an advisory board member at Women Who Code and a contributor for Forbes. I give you Sheree Atcheson with her TEDx talk, The Balance of Being Underrepresented Yet Privileged.
Hi everyone, I'm Sheree Atcheson and I am an award-winning global diversity, equity and inclusion leader. I'm here today to talk to you about being underrepresented yet privileged. I have been doing diversity, equity and inclusion leadership for almost a decade, and in the time that I have done this for organisations of all different sizes, regions, industries, privilege is a core part of the conversations that I have. Now, what is privilege and why are we so uncomfortable talking about it? Privilege is a set of unearned benefits. It is benefits given to a certain group, circle or social construct that ultimately benefits and betters people for no reason. And when I say no reason, what I mean is that there is no skill to being privileged. It is essentially luck. There is no reason that someone should be privileged for X reason over Y reason, other than bias, stereotypes and assumptions, all of which can be incredibly damaging. Now, why are people so uncomfortable talking about privilege? Well, ultimately, it's because it makes people feel like they haven't worked hard or they haven't earned the success that they have. Now, no one is saying that people have not worked hard. Many people have worked hard and still been incredibly privileged. What privilege is dictating and telling us is ultimately that, yes, you may have worked hard, however, there are certain things that could have made it harder, whether that is male privilege, white privilege, ability privilege, and so on and so forth. What's really important is that we understand there's nuance here. You can both have had a difficult journey and be privileged. Now, what's really important in the conversation around privilege is the difference between equity and equality. So often we use the words interchangeably, and we shouldn't do that because they're not the same words, otherwise why would they exist? Equality is about giving people, all people, the same support to progress, to be successful, to do and achieve their goals, whatever they might be. It makes an assumption that everybody is starting on the same starting line. Now, we know that the world does not work that way, and that is very simply facetious to think that we could create a support mechanism that would treat everyone fairly by giving everyone the same support. Equity is very different. Equity is about understanding the differences that different people have, the different support mechanisms that haven't existed and need to exist, so as we can then move forward equitably. We can provide the tailored support that people need based on their backgrounds, based on all of the different things that are making people who they are, that make up society. Society is not a homogeneous group. I want you to think about when you were able to go out and see different people, what it meant, all of the different people that you probably surround yourself with. But also, when you think about the people you surround yourself with, is it quite a homogeneous group? Is it quite similar? How has that affected your mindset? Does that mean that you have potentially a biased view of what support means for different people? If we create inclusion measures that only serve ourselves, we are just creating more exclusion. And very frankly, we don't need that. We don't need any more of that. Now, think about this in real life terms, and I offer my own story as an example. I write quite often about being underrepresented, yet privileged. So, as you can tell, I'm Irish, and I was raised in Ireland. So I was adopted from Sri Lanka when I was 3 weeks old by an Irish family. I want you to think about that first thing for me, that humongous decision that I had no control over at 3 weeks old, but was very lucky to have been adopted. Now, I've been back to Sri Lanka, I've seen my biological family, have met them, I've seen the circumstances, etc., that my half-sister has grown up in, and it's very, very different to the world that I have. Now, was there any skill in me being adopted? No is the answer to that. Is there any skill in me being put up for adoption versus potentially her? No, it was just complete luck. Now think about that, because that one decision has meant that I have been able to be raised in Ireland. I had the ability to go to school every day, to have food every day, to have a bed to sleep on every day, to go to university, albeit with a lot of grants and bursaries, every day. I now am a global leader. I travel the world when it was safe to do so, and now have financial stability. But that one decision has ultimately shaped my entire life. Now, I have a lot of privilege in that if you cover this video camera, you cannot tell I am a person of colour. My name is Sheree Atcheson, and I have an accent like this, so you can't actually tell that I'm a woman of colour until you see me. Now that gives me an anonymity and a privilege that other people of colour do not have. I was raised in Ireland, and my parents were disabled. We grew up on free school meals. My parents were on benefits and so on later on in their lives. And that has given me a very different perspective to those that have always been financially stable. I remember times when it was really, really difficult for my family, but I'm now in the position to be financially stable where I can support other people. Now, I want you to think about what that means, that transition of privilege. I have a partner that I can comfortably speak about because we are both heterosexual. I am able to do the things that I want to do because of the security that financial privilege has given me. Now, it's important that whilst I remember all of this, I'm also still very underrepresented as a senior leader in the industry who is a woman of colour and is 29 years old. It's important to remember there's nuance here. Now, what can we do about this moving forward? What can you do about privilege and your own privilege? Firstly, I want you to sit down and I want you to think about it. I want you to think about what it means to be privileged for you. Please do not get defensive. It is not useful here, and it is ultimately just stopping the conversation before it starts. I want you to think about what it means for you to exist in the world. Because think about what it means for other people to exist in the world who have different experiences to you, because there will be different experiences to you, whether that means they are better or worse. I want you to think about how this affects the processes in your businesses if you're in a workplace. How has privilege manifested itself in your hiring process, your promotion process, your grievance process, and all of the other processes in between? Who do those processes serve? Do they serve everyone? The only way you can try and check that is by understanding the data behind it. Who is actually getting through those processes and who isn't, and what's the reasons behind it? What you also need to do is have continuous conversations with yourself. please remember that sitting down once and thinking, oh God, I'm really privileged. Okay, that's me finished. That's not how this works. You have to keep having these conversations. Remember that privilege evolves and shifts and changes. Keep having these conversations with yourself and with the people around you. And remember that when you care about this stuff, and I hope you do care about inclusion, we care about it because it's so unfair and it's simply not acceptable that the world greatly advantages some while disadvantaging others. And it's your role now to spend time understanding how the world either benefits you or not and what we can do about it together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheree. And now for our next performance by Xian and Xian. Yang is a pianist and a second-year PhD student based in the Sonic Arts Research Centre at Queen's. She's researching performance anxiety within Chinese university piano majors. Xian is an erhu player, and she's just graduated from Queen's with an MA in Arts Management. They're going to perform for us a piece entitled Sunshine on Tashkurgan. They explain that this piece came out of the musical materials of the Tajik ethnic group in Xinjiang in China, along with their unique and strong ethnic customs. Filmed from China, I give you Xian and Xian with their TEDx performance, Sunshine on Tashkurgan. was an amazing performance from Yang and Xiu. Now for our 8th speaker in this TEDx Give Back, Move Forward event. Matthew Geer is working on his doctoral degree at Queen's and is a graduate of the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, where he studied composition. As a composer, Matt writes mainly opera and vocal works, and he frequently draws upon his own experiences with schizoaffective disorder, a condition that combines symptoms of schizophrenia and bipolar. Matt's an award-winning organist. He's played at many major cathedrals in the UK and abroad. As a composer who also suffers from schizophrenia, Matthew has spent a lot of his time learning how to deal with hearing voices and exploring different approaches to listening to music. It's this that has inspired the content of his talk today. Please welcome Matthew Geer with his TEDx talk, Hearing Voices, How Schizophrenia Can Teach Us to Listen.
When I was writing that yesterday, I remember feeling very on edge, agitated and excited. I think I was thinking about things I wouldn't normally think about. I have control over everyone and can manipulate people for my own benefit. I don't need to eat ever again. This morning, I'm in a low. The only thing I want to do today is die. My body is completely drained of all energy, like an empty shell that's being unkindly forced to exist in suffering. I don't want to compose. I don't want to eat. I just want to die. If I had a gun right now, I'd shoot myself. I've just eaten and I'm too drained to even pull a trigger. I wrote that down in 2017 on day 32 of my 5-month admission into a psychiatric unit. After a completely uneventful childhood, a wash of psychosis, mania and depression engulfed my life for about a year. After being discharged and receiving a myriad of medical opinions, I finally received the news. Matthew, you've got schizophrenia. Specifically diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, the condition encompasses both elements of bipolar disorder or depression and schizophrenia, where the sufferer may both have mania and depression, as well as psychotic symptoms such as hearing voices, seeing things, or holding delusional beliefs. Now, I've been hearing voices on and off since I was about 14 years old, but it was only at university when these started to impact my day-to-day life. They would shout at me when I was trying to listen, talk over me when I was trying to speak, or just tell me that today is going to be a bad day. At the end of my hospital diaries, though, I wrote a short note to myself. It said, "You've got no choice other than to hear voices, but you can choose how you listen to them." Over the few years of psychological treatment that followed, many therapists seemed to echo the same thing. There's nothing that you can do to stop the voices in the moment, but you can change how you react to them. Now, there's a parallel here between mental health and physical pain treatment. If you suffer from an excruciating pain in your elbow, you can become increasingly frustrated by the pain, or you can focus deeply on the pain, noticing and being mindful of every element of the pain, how the pain may pulsate or ache or radiate up the arm. Focusing on the elements that make up the pain can often help you in dismantling the internal structures that cause your initial frustration and anger towards that pain. Now, for me, it's the same with hearing voices. I might be hearing a voice telling me that you're worthless. It might be repeating that short phrase over and over again like a mantra or a fire alarm. But instead of getting increasingly frustrated with the voice, I try and dismantle the individual elements of that sound. I won't hear the words as words. I'll listen to the pitch, the speed, the texture, how it's articulated and pronounced. As someone with schizophrenia, I feel that I could deal with voices better, but as a composer and musician more importantly, I still found listening to music really difficult. So, maybe if I listened to music in the same way I listen to the voices, I might hear sound in a new way. So I tried it, and I did. I began listening to music I never thought I'd listen to, focusing intensely on dismantling the specific qualities of each sound I heard. The more I listened, the more self-aware I became, and subsequently, the better my mood was. This doesn't have to just apply to music you don't like, or music you do like. So, an exercise. Find a piece of sound. It might be a soundscape, or some ambient sound, or it might be some music. Make it a mission to invest every bone in your body to listen to that sound. Notice the different layers, the textures, how it might even interact with your surrounding environment. Now, this doesn't have to just relate to a more formal listening experience, though. It might be the sounds around you when you're walking through a woodland, waiting in a queue, or sitting on a bus. Try walking slower when you can. Take time out and allow your mind to wander between what is the consuming whole and the intricate parts of your environment, because you never know what you might hear. Growing up, my only real exposure to the word schizophrenia was through the media, and specifically criminality. I've experienced firsthand the stigmatisation of people suffering with conditions from psychosis. Perhaps, though, by listening to people who suffer from these conditions, we can not only understand better what it means to live with schizophrenia and psychosis, but we also may take away coping mechanisms that can be brought into our own lives. Because, after all, it's not just about hearing our voices, it's about listening.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Our next talk is delivered by two medical students from Queen's. Georgia Stewart and Rebekah Mercer are President and Vice President of SWOT. That's a Queen's University Social Charter project, the Student Working Overseas Trust. SWOT raises funds for essential medical supplies for impoverished hospitals in developing world countries, and they do that by hosting various social events and fundraisers during the year. Because of COVID-19, it's been a difficult year for their charity, but the students remain determined to continue working for those in need. From SWOT, Rebekah Mercer and Georgia Stewart, with their TEDx talk, Advocate Locally for Healthcare Globally.
I want you to try and imagine a scenario. You're sitting at home and you have sudden onset of chest pain, so you're rushed to A&E. As you're lying in your bed, staff around you are running round trying to get things done. You even notice there's patients lying in beds in corridors. You're scared, you're in pain, and 1,000 worst case scenarios are running through your mind. But the one thing bringing you comfort at this time is, I'm in the best place possible. As medical students, this is often our go-to line to bring people comfort when they're scared or afraid in hospital. We remind them that they're in a place with medical equipment and resources to give them the best quality care possible. But now let's switch up the scenario a little bit. We're no longer in the UK, we're somewhere else across the world. You might be thinking, I've seen images on social media or I've been on holiday where I've seen the hospitals in other places. They're amazing, they're incredible. That wouldn't be so bad. But what about one of those countries with extremely high levels of poverty? This time, as you're rushed through the doors of A&E, you're still in pain, you're still scared. But there's not just patients lying in corridors now, there's patients lying in makeshift beds on the floor. Staff are in the middle of a 48-hour shift and they don't have the funding to order simple blood tests, never mind advanced medical scanning. Could you really say at this point you're in the best place possible? I know which scenario I'd rather be in. This is what is described as global health inequalities. It's where one person born in one country might receive poorer quality healthcare than if they were born in another. This is simply due to lack of funding and resources. Surely this isn't fair. But this is where SWOT steps in.
Myself and Rebekah are President and Vice President of the medical student-run charitable society SWOT, which stands for Students Working Overseas Trust. Our aim is to raise money for essential medical supplies for impoverished hospitals all around the world. SWOT represents the principles of the Queen's Social Charter, which promotes a positive impact on society as well as a commitment to equality. Sometimes when we fundraise in the general public, people become less interested in donating when they find out that the money we raise goes to hospitals overseas. But why is that? Let's cast our mind back to March 2020. The angst in our communities is growing and the pressure on the NHS is rising. The fear our hospitals are becoming overwhelmed is becoming a reality, and shortages of PPE are being reported daily in hospitals and in care homes. We're growing frightened for our friends, family members and frontline workers who are fighting COVID-19 head on. Now, imagine you live in a country with high levels of poverty. You may not have a roof over your head, enough food to feed your family, and infectious diseases are highly prevalent due to poor sanitation. Hospitals in these countries may not have PPE, soap or clean water on a regular day, let alone during a global pandemic. Because of this, the baseline level of care that we can receive here in the UK simply cannot be met in these countries. Healthcare workers who work in impoverished hospitals want nothing more than to provide the highest quality care for their patients, but due to a lack of equipment and facilities, they must simply make do with what they have. Poverty exists everywhere globally, but fact remains, if you fall ill here in the UK, you will receive high quality healthcare for free. Depending on where you're born, you may not have this same luxury. We cannot advocate for our own healthcare system without advocating for all healthcare systems.
We're all extremely protective of our NHS, and rightly so. It's one of the best and fairest healthcare systems around the world. Many countries are trying to model their healthcare systems and ours here in the UK, but some simply can't afford to do so. As a result, diseases which are viewed of as historic here in the UK are claiming thousands of lives worldwide every year. Additionally, with the increase in travel and trade between countries, it's now easier than ever for diseases to move from one place to another. If we don't invest in global health now, it's going to come back to affect us, our children, our grandchildren and beyond, putting an already struggling NHS under even further pressure. Is this really a risk you're willing to take?
Using the coronavirus pandemic as an example, we can see how quickly diseases can spread from one side of the globe to another. This demonstrates how healthcare on a global scale can be hugely influential to healthcare on a local scale. If we can aid hospitals in other countries, this will benefit us in the long run too, as the more accessible healthcare is to all globally, the more equipped communities will be to prevent disease, COVID-19 being only one of many. We must also look from the perspective of what we can do at a local scale to benefit society globally. Each small act we can do in our local communities will have a ripple effect to communities worldwide. Whether it be a small donation, a conversation with friends and family, or taking time to educate yourself on global health inequality and what we can do to change it, will have a massive impact on the world if we all make the conscious effort to do so.
Thanks so much to Georgia and Rebekah. What amazing work you guys are doing. Next up, we have a very familiar face and proof also that there can be life after politics. Simon Hamilton is a former MLA who served in some of the biggest jobs in government here: Economy Minister, Health Minister and Finance Minister. His degrees in history, politics and law from Queen's might well have helped with some of that. He's now Chief Executive of Belfast Chamber of Trade and Commerce, a challenging role, as you can imagine, during such a difficult time for our commercial sector. Simon's TEDx talk today is on a topic he is passionate about. With the pandemic hitting cities like Belfast very hard, he explores how empowered cities have responded best to the trends created by COVID-19. I give you Simon Hamilton with his TEDx talk, Empowering Cities.
Do you remember this from a few months ago? The week that this guy, dressed in what can only be described as a cagoule and looking like a cross between a geography teacher and a member of an Oasis tribute band, took on the government and embarrassed Boris Johnson. I don't want to sound too much like a Andy Burnham fanboy, not least because he is a diehard Evertonian and I'm a lifelong Liverpool supporter. But his defiant stance in defence of his city and its interest got me thinking. Around about the same time, Belfast was facing a similar threat that it would be put in a different level of lockdown compared to the rest of Northern Ireland. And whilst we had lots of people raising their concerns about what that might mean, we didn't have that one single, powerful, go-to voice like Manchester speaking up for our city's interest. That made me wonder, what if Belfast had a directly elected mayor? What if we had an Andy Burnham of our own? Actually, since I started my new role with Belfast Chamber just over a year ago, it's something that's been swirling around in my mind for quite some time. Not so much the idea of a directly elected mayor, more the need to empower our city. I think we can all agree that Belfast is blessed to have a civic building as beautiful as a city hall. It exudes a certain authority, a stature that suggests that beneath its dome, power resides. When it first opened in 1905, that was an accurate impression. In the preceding century, Belfast had grown from little more than a small village to an industrial powerhouse that many considered to be the second city of Queen Victoria's empire. Our city fathers set about building a place worthy of such a status. As well as constructing the City Hall itself, the Belfast Corporation and other city institutions built a 50-mile-long tram system more than 100 years before the glider. They delivered thousands of social housing units, decades before the term social housing even existed. And in a feat of engineering that would be amazing even today, they put in place the essential infrastructure that still brings tap water to our city from miles and miles away up in the Mourne Mountains. Fast forward to now, and the building is still the same, but that power to fundamentally shape our city simply isn't there anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, we have a great council that takes its civic leadership role seriously and has set out an ambitious vision for our city in the Belfast agenda. But I'd suspect that there would be few councillors who would disagree with me that for a city of its size, of its regional importance, and its economic significance, Belfast does not possess the same powers as our competitor cities elsewhere on these islands and across Europe enjoy. And for me, it's an issue that has been amplified during the pandemic. This awful, interlinked health and economic emergency has made many of us rethink what cities are for and how they will survive and thrive in the years ahead. Mayors and councils around the world have seized the opportunity created by the coronavirus crisis to reimagine their cities. Milan, one of the cities hit hardest by COVID-19, announced back in April that it was, whilst it was still in the middle of a shutdown, that it was creating 35 kilometres of new walking and cycling space. Paris is investing 300 million euros in its cycling infrastructure. And in San Francisco, they have converted car parking spaces into more than 100 parklets for cafes and restaurants to use, whilst indoor space is limited because of social distancing. Here in Belfast, we have at least made a start. The council has constructed a pop-up play park at Cathedral Gardens. Some temporary bike lanes have been built, and we have created one parklet on the Ormeau Road. Much more ambitious plans exist, and I'm confident that many of them will be implemented. But it has been a slow and sometimes painful process, and a disjoin between Stormont and City Hall has been a factor. The big difference between Belfast and those other cities that I have mentioned isn't a lack of vision, it's a lack of power. How we empower cities like Belfast is something that we can debate and discuss. It could be anything from a directly elected mayor to a wider metropolitan authority to simply devolving more powers to City Hall. The how isn't the issue, it's the why. And that's all about aligning that vision with the powers to deliver it, so that our city can continue to attract talent and investment and better reflect the desires of an increasingly diverse population. In his new book, The Nation City, Rahm Emanuel argues that cities are now the crucible of innovation when it comes to public policy. Whether it's transportation or the environment or the economy, he suggests that cities can be more immediate, intimate, and impactful. And that's exactly what we need in Belfast. Belfast, like cities everywhere, is in the midst of a massive challenge. Others loom large on the horizon. If we want to move forward, if we want to help our city to rebuild economically and socially post-pandemic, if we want to reshape our city so that it is an even better place to live, work, and play, and if we want our city to be ready to face future challenges like climate change, then perhaps we need to give back powers to our city.
Thank you, Simon. And now we have another treat in store for you. Taken once again from Queen's TEDx 2019 live event, The Priests hit the musical headlines back in April 2008 when they signed a £1 million record deal with the music giant Sony. Fathers Eugene O'Hagan, his brother Martin, and David Delargy are all Queen's graduates, performing Danny Boy, Eleanor Rigby, and the Irish Blessing for TEDx Queen's University Belfast. I present to you The Priests.
Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the flowers are dying. 'Tis you must go and I must bide. But come ye back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow. 'Tis I'll be there in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so. But when you come and all the flowers are dying, if I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me. And I shall hear the soft you tread above me, and on my grave will warmer, sweeter be. And you shall bend and tell me that you love me. And I shall until you come to me.
Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. It's a delight for us to be here. This is the first TEDx gathering at Queen's, and as Coletta said, we are former pupils and students of Queen's. We were here in the very late 20th century, and that set us up nicely for the beginning of the 21st. We began with what's known, of course, across Ireland and elsewhere as a kind of a national anthem, O Danny Boy, and we go now to the Beatles. This is a bit of a jump, but we cover all kind of repertoires in our particular genre and our particular makeup as the priests. We were wondering, though, which one to choose from the plethora of wonderful music that the Beatles have written, Lennon and Paul McCartney, etc. Was it going to be the Yellow Submarine that greets you as you go out of the John Lennon Airport at Liverpool? Was it going to be Strawberry Fields Forever? But we decided on Eleanor Rigby. It's got a great message. They not only write great tunes, but great lyrics. And it reminds us, as the refrain says, of all the lonely people. Where do they all come from? Where do they all belong?
Look at all the lonely people. Look at all the lonely people.
Eleanor Rigby picks up the rice in the church where a wedding has been. Lives in a dream, waits at the window, wearing the face that she keeps in a jar by the door. Who is it for?
All the lonely people. Where do they all come from? All the lonely people. Where do they all belong? Father Mackenzie, writing the words to a sermon that no one will hear. No one comes near, look at him working, darning his socks in the night when there's nobody there. What does he care? All the lonely people, where do they all come from? All the lonely people, where do they all belong? Oh, look at all the lonely people. Oh, look at all the lonely people.
Eleanor Rigby died in the church and was buried along with her name. Nobody came, Father Mackenzie, wiping the dirt from his hands as he walks from the grave. No one was saved.
Oh, look at all the lonely. Where do they all come from? Oh, look at all the lonely. Where do they all belong?
Thank you so much. We're very fortunate to have the wonderful Ruth McGinley with us this evening, ladies and gentlemen, as our accompanist. We end with a piece that has kind of, in a way, become our signature farewell song. You know, as you go through various airports, either coming to Ireland or leaving Ireland, you want to take a little trinket with you on your journey to bring to somebody at home or a loved one. Usually it can be a little fridge magnet of some description. And invariably, if you're going through Dublin or Belfast or elsewhere, you can pick up all kinds of little sayings on the fridge magnet. There's ones that, you know, there's a very deep theological one that appeals to us, which is, may you be in heaven half an hour before the devil knows you're dead. That always kind of gives us a bit of a tickle as we're kind of going through. But And of course, you can buy them in all shapes and sizes, and tea towels, etc. But the words of some of the lovely Irish kind of sayings that we have, whilst they may appear on simple objects, tea towels and the like, nevertheless, they can still be very profound. And this one you'll find on all kinds of little things, but it is indeed no less profound. It's the Irish blessing. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be ever at your back.
May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be ever at your back.
May the sun shine warm upon your face, and the rain fall soft upon your feet.
And until we meet again, may God hold you, may God hold you, ever in the palm of his hand.
May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be ever at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and the rain fall soft upon your feet. And until we meet again, may God hold you, may God hold you, ever in the palm of his hand. Ever in the palm of his hand. The palm of his hand.
A brilliant performance, as always, from the priest. Now to our penultimate talk. Fina Wurm is an honorary assistant psychologist and a postgraduate at the Queen's School of Psychology. She has a strong interest in the application of music and art in psychology, and she hopes to pursue that, in fact, in her doctoral studies. Prior to working in psychology, Fina was an award-winning flautist who studied at the University of Performing Arts in Vienna. Her TEDx talk is one from the heart. Here to tell you more, Fina Wurm with her talk Saving Lives by Changing the Default.
I'm going to tell you a story about Hannah, a woman that lives about 10 minutes away from me here in Belfast. Hannah has very kindly allowed me to share a story about her life with you today. So the story begins when Hannah was 15 years old. It was the week before Christmas 2008, and she started to develop symptoms that were similar to a flu. But it wasn't a flu because a few days later she coughed up blood, and that night she was in a critical condition in intensive care. As a result of an autoimmune disease called vasculitis, her kidneys had started to fail, and her chances of survival were diminishing. When I spoke to Hannah's mother, Susan, about this time, I was shaken by what I heard. Her mum told me, and I'm going to read a few quotes for you here. Her life was touch and go. I never left her side. I didn't want to break down because she was being so stoic. As her hair fell out, I'd scoop it up so she wouldn't see, and I wished it were me instead. I prayed that she would live. Hannah spent the next year on dialysis. I didn't know this until I spoke with Susan, but a consequence of being on dialysis is that your diet is restricted. And with limited kidney function, you can drink only up to 500 millilitres of liquid a day. For reference, that's a glass of water of about this size. The average adult like you and like me, we drink about 6 times this amount of water per day. If Hannah drank any more than this one glass, her blood pressure would spike due to fluid retention and she'd have a life-threatening seizure. So she was constantly thirsty. Put yourself in her shoes for a minute. Imagine what it would be like to not be able to quench your own thirst for fear of it being fatal. That is the life somebody waiting for a transplant lives every single day. Last year, 9 people died in Northern Ireland because organs were not available to save their lives. And right now, there are approximately 140 people waiting for life-saving transplants in hospital beds as close as 5 minutes from where I am standing right now. Some of them will get transplants, but what happens to those that don't? There are 2 legislative systems of organ donation, the opt-in and the opt-out. The mutual feature of these 2 systems is that you get to decide whether you want to donate or not. No matter what system is in place, your choice is not taken away. Now, the difference between these systems is the default. In the opt-in, you are not considered an organ donor unless you've specifically opted in by signing the NHS registry. Now, in the opt-out, you are considered an organ donor unless you've specifically opted out by signing the NHS registry. The opt-out system is used in Wales and England, and as of later this year in Scotland too. There was a consultation on in January of 2021 in Northern Ireland with the objective of changing the legislation here from the opt-in to the opt-out. And I'm going to tell you why that could be the right move for Northern Ireland. So, the objective of changing the legislation is to save lives, and we can do that by increasing the amount of organs being donated. Research tells us that, simply put, changing the legislative system from the opt-in to the opt-out can significantly increase donation rates. One reason for this is donation culture. People in opt-out countries are 17 to 29% more willing to donate organs than people in opt-in. It's because, as Rebekah English of the British Medical Association says, donation is seen as the norm rather than the exception. British individuals living in Spain, the country with the highest donation rates per year, are 4 times more willing to donate organs when living in Spain than they are when living in England. Why? Donation is seen as the norm in Spanish culture, and with only 47% of Northern Irish individuals on the NHS registry, donation being the exception, is still very much part of our culture. Changing the legislation could change this perspective. Now, another reason that changing the legislation could increase donation rates is due to family consent rates. In either the opt-in or the soft opt-out system, the family of the person who has died will always be asked to consent before donation can take place. In the hard opt-out system, they're not consulted at all. The soft opt-out system is the legislative system under discussion for Northern Ireland. So you might wonder, if the family essentially get the final say, why does it actually matter what system is in place? Well, when the family of the person who has died don't know if they wanted to donate or not, the default influences their choice, and it's primarily down to the language used in the donation consultation. In the opt-out system, the family can be asked by the transplant team if they can proceed with donation as their loved one is a registered donor, now, albeit by default. In Wales, 2 years after changing the legislation, families were almost 3 times more likely to consent when asked like this than families in England that were using the opt-in system at the time. in the opt-in system. The family can be asked by the transplant team if they can proceed with donation despite their loved one not being registered as a donor. Changing the legislation means that we can optimise the language used in the donation consultation. Lastly, be in support of legislative change, because every discussion on this topic is an opportunity to inspire change on an individual level. It's a platform for raising awareness, a medium to share harrowing stories, and an opportunity to educate on the steps needed to becoming an organ donor. Yes, we need to change our legislative system, but we need to not get lost in debate, and we always need to remember this message on the forefront of our discussions. Organ donation is a gift of life. You're giving life to somebody else. I mean, I can't think of a gift that's greater than that. Every donor has the potential to save up to 9 lives and significantly improve 50 others. Becoming a donor means that you could do this too. I said earlier on in my speech that in the soft opt-out system, your family or your loved one will always be asked to consent prior to donation taking place. So if you take one message from this speech today, I really hope it is this. Tell them you want to donate. Have the chat. 2 years after Hannah first became critically ill, she received a life-changing kidney transplant. Despite missing years of school, she sat her A-levels with her friends and she got amazing results. She got 2 A's and a B. Then she went on to travel the world, living life to the full. She even won a gold medal at the UK British Transplant Games for her athletic achievements. Hannah became a primary school teacher and later she did specialist training to work with kids with special needs. Currently, she works with children with severe levels of autism. Hannah put so much good into this world, a world that without organ donors wouldn't have her in it. Encourage legislative change, be a donor and have the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fina. That was a really powerful message. And now for our final TEDx talk of the day. Nathalie Trott is Director of Development and Alumni Relations at Queen's University. She's worked in the higher education sector since 2002, building relationships, connecting graduates to their alma mater, strengthening ties with supporters of universities. This is Nathalie's talk. Why should universities engage with their graduates?
Have you ever wondered why your university sends you a glossy magazine every year? Or why they invite you to swanky events? Or, these days, to Zoom roundtables? You probably think it's because they only want your money. Well, I'm here today to dispel that myth. Over the last 20 years, I've worked at 5 different universities, and each of them has maintained that they value their relationship with their graduates, regardless of their intention to give. And yet I've spoken to countless alumni for whom that rhetoric just doesn't ring true. And I suspect that part of the reason for that is because alumni relations professionals, people like me, aren't always entirely clear about why we're doing it. Alumni relations is not all about fundraising, and yet there are so many ways in which we would love our graduates to give. The dictionary definition of a relationship is the way in which 2 or more things are connected. And so, by definition, alumni have a relationship to their university, in the way that the ocean has a relationship to the beach. And yet alumni relations should be more than that, more personal, like the bond with a childhood friend whose great-grandchildren you have every intention of knowing. Now, if we think about the relationships we have that we hope will last a lifetime, I dare say there are a lot of similarities. They're the relationships that we entered into willingly, even if one person did court the other slightly more to start with. And they're the kind of relationships that are sustained by a shared vision, shared value, couples goals. Now, universities do invest in alumni relations, in part, for the altruistic benefit of sharing knowledge with society, and maintaining connections to all those that we educated. But in a world of finite resources, it's fair to assume that the university is doing it for a reason. And what that reason is, I'll come to in a moment. But universities wouldn't be doing it at all if we didn't think that alumni would respond to our advances. So what is it that alumni want? Take the young alumna I worked with more than a decade ago on an advisory board who now holds public office. She was motivated by a strong sense of civic duty and a desire to give back to the university that she felt had transformed her life chances. Focused on her future, she wanted to build her network and make connections to people already in public life, and serving on the advisory board allowed her to do just that. Watching her hold her own in her early 20s with lords and ladies, captains of industry, and household celebrities, I'm not at all surprised when I see her on TV now at how well she's doing. And I'm glad her university was able to help her achieve that. Or take the serial entrepreneur who's made his millions but finds time every year to judge the university's Dragon's Den contest. He gets a real buzz from working with young people. But more than that, he wants to play a part in building an entrepreneurial ecosystem on his home turf, which should mean that young people no longer need to up sticks and move to the USA, as he himself did, in order to have those opportunities. He believes that a partnership with the university is the best way to do that. Or take the alumni in Malaysia, who for decades have been running public speaking and essay writing contests in local high schools. In the name of their university, they want to raise aspirations and demonstrate the benefits of an English-speaking education. Along the way, they've made friendships, business connections, and welcomed countless generations of students back to Malaysia. Universities have hundreds of thousands of graduates, and there are as many possible reasons for connecting as there are graduates. Which brings me back to the truth that many in my profession are uncomfortable to acknowledge. Alumni relations is not about treating all graduates equally. It is about treating all graduates well, and then prioritising those alumni that want to build a relationship with their university. About finding a sweet spot between what alumni want, what the university needs, and what resources there are to support this. So, what is it that universities want? Well, they're facing very similar challenges right now. Financial sustainability, global geopolitics, widening participation, student satisfaction, demonstrating the impact of research, climate change, the list goes on. And alumni can and will help with all of those things, if only universities are clear about what they need and systematic about how they take advantage of those offers of support. Take the Australian university, for example, that realised they needed to do something to transform their student experience. So they worked with literally thousands of their graduates to create a mentoring programme to give those students access to a money can't buy network of people ahead of them in their careers. Or take the university in the Republic of Ireland that set about connecting local alumni in the business community to students from economically and socially disadvantaged backgrounds in order to introduce them to the alien concept of workplace norms. Neither of those programs appealed to the entire alumni community in the same way that you wouldn't expect every one of your friends to like every one of your Facebook posts. But what they both did was identify things that alumni cared about and match them with things that the university needed and was able to support. Now, the thing about alumni relations is that you don't see the benefits quickly. You certainly won't see them on the first date when a student attends an open day. And you won't see them at the engagement party on the first day of the first term of first year. You won't even see them at the wedding ceremony on graduation day. Am I stretching this relationship metaphor too far? I don't think I am. Because as with all good, long-lasting relationships, the point of alumni relations is that it needs investment and time and commitment from both parties in order to realise its full potential. I firmly believe that alumni are the greatest untapped resource of our universities. And I think we should be confident to ask our graduates to support us. And I think that we should be confident to admit that although we are proud and supportive of all those that we educated, we do place a special value on and owe a debt of gratitude to those alumni who choose to be in a relationship with us, who choose to give us their time, talents, and treasures to support our missions. Alumni relations is different things at different times to different people. But at its core, the point of alumni relations is to engage our graduates with purpose in advancing the mission of our institutions. So the next time you receive the alumni magazine or an e-bulletin and you think, I could help with that, don't be a stranger, get in touch, and let's see what we can achieve together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nathalie. A great message, and a great message to conclude our event with today, because that is it. Thanks to all our speakers, all of our performers. You were absolutely terrific. And you represented Queen's University wonderfully. They've inspired us by illustrating with passion how each of them in some way are giving something back as they go about their daily lives, be it through their research, their teaching, study, work, or volunteering. And huge thanks to our corporate partner, AFLAC Northern Ireland. We will be publishing videos of all of our talks, all of our performances on the university website soon. So please keep an eye out for that. And thanks for making the TEDx journey with us. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you again soon.